Welcome to the Jay and Rob Toy Show. I'm your host, Rob McCallum, but this is a 2-for-1 deal, as in there's two of us on this one show. So let me bring in the Wolverine to my Colossus, Mr. Jay Bartlett.
I like Wolverine, and he's Canadian. What's going on, buddy? How are you?
I am good, and I am ready to talk toys this week, if you are.
I'm always ready to talk toys, dude. Let's do it.
This time we're gonna switch gears a bit, and this time we're gonna talk vehicles. Now, vehicles are an integral part of any action figure line. But Jay, what makes a vehicle integral to action figures? Well, how did you use a vehicle? What is the role of a vehicle?
Well, one of my favorite playtime scenarios when I was a kid, of course, was playing the three elements, the G.I. Joe story, the mass device, where we had the different elements from my house to the neighbor's house behind, and then a spot in the middle. Of course, you needed the Sky Striker, you needed the whale to get to all these different spots to get these elements. So first and foremost, obviously, they transported our action figures to the action.
Yeah, when you're talking the Sky Striker and a 3 3/4 inch action figure like a G.I. Joe, it's a long trek across the basement carpet to get one from one side to another. So definitely the vehicle is that power up during playtime. It gives the character a bunch of extra mobility to go from one side to another, especially if you're playing Floor is Lava or something like that. I also think a vehicle, in some cases, is an extension of the character. Some characters are nothing if it's not for the vehicle. I think one of your favorite examples is Panthro. Panthro has to go with the Thunder Tank. He is not a complete character without something like that.
Sure, yeah, I would agree with that. I thought you were gonna say Han, and I was gonna correct you really fast, but I'm glad you went with Panthro. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, he's the lead engineer for the Thundercats, and of course, the Thunder Tank is his baby, so you gotta have Panthro.
Well, I think Han Solo is quite a rounded character on his own, but I think the Millennium Falcon is a great extension of who he is. Just like Han, the Falcon is rough around the edges. It's a bit of an underdog like Han. You're not sure how he does it because he never seems to have his, stuff together. But the Falcon always gets through, and so does Han. So I think the Falcon is very much an extension of Han, and by proxy, Chewie.
Absolutely, and it's great going through the generations of Star Wars with Solo, a Star Wars story, and we see how Lando had the ship all pristine and beautiful, and how when Han kind of took over, it kind of started to fall apart, and he started making, special modifications that weren't exactly legal. And then when it gets passed down to Rey as well, she has the same kind of problems where it just conks out, and then at the 0 hour, it picks up and, saves the day.
But when we're talking vehicles, we're not just talking flying spaceships, we're also talking what we call the mounts, or characters that can be put on animals to transport them. And then one of the best cases, of course, is Battle Cat.
Yeah, of course, Battle Cat's been there since the very beginning of Masters of the Universe. He was there in the original comic books, even before there was Cringer and there was Prince Adam, there was Battle Cat. So he's definitely a must in the Masters line.
Now, can you think of any other mounts from action figure lines that are of the same territory or that were as critical to the vehicle side?
Would you count She-Ra? Because I could say Swiftwind, but I guess that's kind of the same series.
I'd totally count She-Ra and all the other, Princesses of Power, because mounts were practically built into almost every character in that line. They all seem to have a companion horse. Even Bo had Arrow, of course. So getting around places and having that companion, every character having a sidekick and a way to travel, was certainly part of that line.
Yeah, and you know me, buddy. I prefer She-Ra and her whole story over He-Man's, and I actually like Swiftwind better. Cringer was kind of annoying to me, so I didn't really like that whole part of it, but Swiftwind was always really solid.
Well, here's one that I know you love as well. Let's talk Sectars, because the Sectars, those mounts were super cool and very inventive. You had Dargon and the Dragon Flyer, and you had Spydrex, and was it the Spider Flyer?
Yes, the Spider Flyer, yeah. Yeah, creepy, very creepy. I have some on my beautiful shelves back here. But yeah, those mounts were just absolutely gorgeous. The kind of oily see-through wings, they were motorized, just beautiful toys. And of course they were puppets, right? You could stick your hand in and your fingers became all the legs for the mounts. But it's really interesting with the new Sectars line that launched that there is no mounts. So that's one thing that you and I have been talking about, is hopefully down the line they do that, because Sectars is a toy line that definitely needs their mounts.
And you bring up new iterations of lines, and one line that you're on the fence about and one line that I like, or at least style, are the reaction figures. And they just released Battle Cat for that line. And it's always exciting when Battle Cat gets announced for anything because it's a bigger character, but it's also one of those staple characters, as you mentioned. But reaction doesn't bend. Those figures don't really bend. They have very limited points of articulation. So you have to slide He-Man in the middle of Battle Cat there, and he just sits in basically like a hole, like a donut hole, which is really strange to see. But they found a way, I guess, to have Battle Cat in that line as a mount.
And that's taken right from the Kenner design for the Tauntaun and the Dewback, where they would have, even the D&D line, where they would have the legs of Warduke, kind of painted on the edge of Nightmare, and you would stick Warduke right in the center, so it had the appearance that his legs were spread out. Because the mounts were so big, their feet would be like bowed out. It would look really ridiculous. So, and of course, Luke and the Tauntaun, yeah. So it's really cool to see that they went back to that old school design. It works, though.
I agree. And you mentioned that, vehicles are, of course, a way to transport a character during playtime, whether you're in outer space, in a cave, in a dungeon, or whatever. This thing can help get these characters from A to B. It can help blow up the Terrordrome or whatever they're up against. But what makes a vehicle good? Like when you're looking at a vehicle, an action figure vehicle, what does that vehicle have to really translate to that play experience? Because they're not all created equally.
My favorite vehicles, one would be the G.I. Joe Killer Whale. Capacity. You can fit so many figures inside the whale. 1, 2, 3, and then 4 in the bulk there. So I love vehicles that can transport, and the whale's also very badass, right? It's got missiles and it can fight. It's not just like a troop transport.
I was gonna say troop transport. That's kind of like a sleazy marketing vehicle. Like, sure, it serves a function, but it like forces you to buy all those figures, and we've seen it in Star Wars. It's been reissued for The Mandalorian, and of course the Masters equivalent is Battle Bones, which despite amazing box art for Battle Bones, it's like you gotta have everybody, stuck between those rib rungs in order to be able to transport everybody at the same time. But I think you're right with the Killer Whale. You could put so many figures on that and create a really cool kind of arsenal.
It's funny you mentioned Battle Bones because that was a ridiculous vehicle that I never did own as a kid. And it kind of reminds me of those unnecessary superpower figures, like Superman's, what was it, the jogging thing or whatever, something silly like that. But can you imagine He-Man, Tila, Man-at-Arms? It's like, okay, we're gonna truck across this desert. Well, we don't really want to walk. Let's just get this big dragon thing to kind of carry us. It just seemed really ridiculous to me.
You're referring to the infamous Justice Jogger, in which Superman, Wonder Woman, or any member of the Justice League would sit down in a chair with robotic legs to do the walking for them, despite the fact that most of them can fly or travel at great speeds. But let's not forget Superman's like super jet or super plane or whatever that thing is, because clearly he needs a plane to fly. How do we get maybe one of the best vehicles in all of action figure history with that iconic superpowers, metallic blue Batmobile, and yet still have some of these other vehicles? And that superpower jet, it's like a mirror image of the Lex Luthor one, the Lexor, which makes sense because Lex Luthor can't fly, so he needs a jet, and there's some sort of kryptonite thing baked into it, but not Superman. They might as well have just given you an empty box and called it Wonder Woman's invisible jet.
See, and I was just gonna reference her jet because I love that thing. I had the old original Mego figures from the early 70s, the 3.75 ones. My grandpa bought me Wonder Woman and the Invisible Jet, and it was just clear plastic. But that thing was so cool. I always wondered why they didn't make that for the Superpowers line instead of these other ones they made up. But Kenner did the same thing with Star Wars with all those mini rigs that they made. The toy designers, they did a great job designing it, but those weren't Star Wars vehicles. Those were, they were designs that the toy makers made. I'm pretty sure that's what the Superpowers things were, man.
You mentioned capacity. That's a great feature when you can have lots of characters in a single vehicle or lots of different spots for characters to go. You also mentioned when you're talking about sectors, the motorization, the mechanization of some of those mounts. That's a play feature. So are play features integral? Because as much as I love the Superpowers Batmobile, as do you, I don't really think those play features are great. Like the battering ram that pushes out or the claw that grabs in the background, like those aren't things for me that make that vehicle good. They're kind of silly.
If it's a part of what the vehicle is, and I'll reference Mask here, if there's a bunch of buttons on Rhino, for instance, because the battering ram shoots out or the missile shoots out, that I like. But because Mask vehicles transform, that's what they do. That's fine. But I don't like a bunch of play features like, if the Batmobile shot missiles or had a back missile. I don't like any of that stuff. It's one reason I love the Flag, the play set, because the missiles, for most of the Joe vehicles too, you just pull out and use your imagination, right? You don't need any kind of spring action to shoot it off. It just seems very unimaginative.
Sure, well, you've brought up Mask. That's on my special list to definitely talk to you about. Mask is a very vehicle-heavy line. Obviously, so is G.I. Joe and Transformers. Those three lines are really dependent on vehicles. Masters of the Universe, I don't even care about the vehicles. I could enjoy those figures if I had the Wind Raider or the Blaster Hawk or Stridor or the Attack Track or the Dragon Walker. I don't need them to enjoy the core concept of Masters. But G.I. Joe, Transformers, and Mask, those vehicles need to work well. So you've mentioned Mask already. Do you want to go down that path again and talk about some of the highlight vehicles of that line?
Yeah, of course. One that you and I are huge fans of, obviously, is Matt Tracker and the Thunderhawk, the original Camaro that's on a certain TV series poster. It's just such an iconic vehicle. Second to that, this might be able to be argued, but Rhino. Rhino is one of the most gorgeous vehicles, I think, in all of toy history. I think it's just beautifully designed. It has real rubber tires with the Goodyear logo on them, chrome everywhere. And if you got one that's in good shape, the chrome is just glistening off this thing. The decals on the inside of the computer decks. The figures are really tiny. They're 2-inch figures, but in the console of Rhino, in the cab, there's a little steering wheel, there's shifter knobs. It's just, Kenner knocked it out of the park with that series. And also another reason why they were so expensive.
I gotta tell you, I have to disagree. While Rhino is cool, I gotta go with Condor for maybe the second best Mask vehicle, because it's helicopter, it's motorcycle, it's small, it's tiny, it's wicked. But Switchblade is also cool. That's Miles Mayhem's, that's his jam. The way that it goes from helicopter to jet is really cool. And the design of it is just really sleek.
My name is Nelson Loughran. I work in, my normal job would be research and development. I build and design custom outdoor furniture for a shop not very far away from here. This would be the basement of my house, which is completely filled with toys. This is kind of the random Star Wars collection here, like little keychains, random stuff I picked up over the years. My Boba Fett helmet, which my sister got me for Christmas. This is probably the first thing I got that a family member knew that I was a collector. And this is my the vintage Thundercats collection, which I just recently picked up. I think I'm gonna attempt to tell myself that I'm gonna be happy with, just getting Jacko-Man, and I've got the whole original first season, but there's a few more to go, and it's probably gonna want to be one of those hunting things. This is all my Spawn stuff. Came across a guy in Kijiji a few years ago, and he had all this Spawn stuff, and it was a great deal. It was all sealed in packages, and it was duplicates. So I picked it up thinking this is gonna be a great investment. I'm gonna get all the Spawn characters I want, and I'm gonna get them carded. Little did I know that the market value for Spawn figures, period, right now is essentially nothing. They're probably worth less than what they were on the card when they were available brand new. But I think they're cool. I dug Spawn when I was younger. I've got the collection of comic books and stuff, and Todd McFarlane is probably one of my favorite artists in the comic book world right now. This is the recent edition. It's my Motu collection, and sadly it's missing Skeletor, it's missing He-Man, and a few others. It's a pretty expansive line. He-Man and Skeletor are on the way. They sadly didn't arrive here in the mail before we shot, but they will be here. And I watched a lot of videos on YouTube, and these other ones kept popping up about making mountains and train sets and stuff. So I went out and I found a bunch of blue foam, and I decided to try and make my own cliff for Castle Grayskull. So that's my attempt, and my wife was kind enough to have a bag of fake moss on hand, so it worked out great. I don't know, between me and my friends, we like to call it a disease, and it is very much so. I don't think you can ever really get to the end of your collection. I think when you get to that point where you've got everything you possibly want, there's that one more thing you're always gonna chase, or that other line that maybe you feel a connection to from your childhood. And then moving along here, I clearly have an abundance of Autobots, which is, it's kind of an accident. I don't prefer Autobots to Decepticons, maybe just because of Optimus Prime being my favorite character, but yeah, this is pretty much a lot of stuff from the last probably 4 or 5 lines of Transformers. I did back in the day have quite a few Generation 1 Transformers, but the collecting world is probably gonna kill me, but I just thought the new Transformers, the new molds, they look way better than the G1 stuff. The G1 stuff, a lot of it bugged me because they just looked like they were standing there and they had no life to them. This is probably the biggest display in the basement. It's Star Wars Land, which it's referred to in my house, and I've actually got my friends calling it that now, and they come over and they were eager to see my additions to it because I'm adding things to this all the time. But yeah, so I built myself a kind of an Imperial bunker here, and I've kind of combined all the generations of Star Wars into one. So I've got the clone troopers with the stormtroopers, and they serve the same purpose, right? So, and I've got my you know, Darth Vader's hanging out with Kylo Ren, with the Emperor, and clearly that's not canon, but that's the way it works in my world. So I think the thing that makes action figures special is, like I mentioned before, like that connection to your childhood, that feeling young again. And I think when you're a kid, you look at action figures in a different perspective, obviously, than when you're older, because the reason I create my dioramas and things like that is because when I was a kid, you would watch a Transformers commercial and it's like, right on, oh my God, Devastator just came smashing through that brick wall. I want that brick wall. I don't really care about Devastator. I want that scenery and G.I. Joe and all those, and that's kind of what I've done with my collection now, is kind of recreate that, what I would have wanted as a child kind of thing, I guess. And then we kind of get into what I call like the living space, or the markets and stuff like that, where I've just kind of tried to set up kind of a living world where you've got people, you've got little stands, you've got a market, you've got Jawas just kind of hanging out with army guys. And that's one thing, like I've still retained a few little G.I. Joes and offshoot little 3 3/4 lines. So you'll find a lot of those guys. Like I've got Scorpion and Smoke from Mortal Kombat just kind of chilling out by this house, and yeah, there's a G.I. Joe guy there. I think, I can't find him right now, but there was some Battlestar Galactica guys hanging out here somewhere, but it's hard to keep track of them all when you got so many. And then going down here, this is kind of my cantina or bar, where I've got, you know, all the great characters hanging out in this little cantina. I've got Destro hanging out at the bar with Yoda, which is clearly not correct in any ways, except here. But yeah, we got Captain Jack Sparrow, we've got Indiana Jones, some random guy. I still have no idea who he's from or what he does, but he hangs out in the bar. Captain Kirk, we've got you know, some Vipers hanging out from G.I. Joe, with Jabba the Hutt around the corner here, and yeah, it's just a kind of just a bustling market. It looks like I'm gonna need another basement for sure. What I'm trying to tell myself right now is that, okay, He-Man is gonna be the last thing. He-Man is the last thing I'm gonna collect, and I know better. I'm just telling myself that. But you know, I've actually just recently used up the last valuable part of real estate in my basement. And I think from there, I think it just kind of evolves in the way, like I'm actually thinking now that maybe I should get rid of these and do this, or anything like that. But I guess as long as you got space, it's just gonna keep going.
Well, that sound means it's time for Action Figure Spotlight, Jay. And since we've been talking about vehicles, I can't wait to see what you're gonna show off.
I love show and tell. You know, this is my favorite time. I'm going to talk about a vehicle that I never did have and that my friend Darren had. Now, this was a G.I. Joe vehicle that at first glance might seem very plain and boring, but I assure you it's not. This is the 1982 G.I. Joe Mobat with Steeler, who is not here, he's in that case. This is just a plain green army tank, and there's something in the simplicity of it all. I just love how it's just a regular army tank. There's nothing super fancy about it. But did you know that it's motorized? So the cockpit here, you push it forward or back, and it would make the tank roll forward and reverse, and it would also go over books and any kind of smaller obstacles that you had. I just love how it turns and pivots. It's just one of the coolest G.I. Joe vehicles, and it's one of the very first. I love it.
That is a great pick, because you don't get a lot of motorized stuff when it comes to G.I. Joe vehicles, let alone the early ones that can actually tackle living room terrain like books. That really puts you into the play environment no matter what you're dealing with.
Absolutely.
Well, my pick for this week is something a little bit newer, and that is the Wind Raider for Masters of the Universe Classics. Now, first of all, I should say that it's few and far between you actually get a vehicle for a 6-inch adult collector line, but they managed to bring out a lot of them. And this is not just like a statuesque creation. They made it so that you can put characters in. Here I have Man-at-Arms sitting in the cockpit, but the wings move, just like the classic. The tail fin moves. It is on a stand, but the stand can come off and there are wheels. And this pops up and the hook actually shoots out. So there's a play feature in an adult collectible toy, which is super rare. It just doesn't happen anymore these days to get that kind of thing. So pretty cool. And the price point on this, Jay, was $50, which is pretty remarkable considering that's what the average figures are going for nowadays. So the Wind Raider is one of those iconic Masters of the Universe vehicles. You don't need vehicles for that line, but when you have them at this size with this much detail as designed by the Horseman, it's a definite pickup, and it certainly adds to your shelf life and display necessity. So the Wind Raider for Masters of the Universe.
That's sick though, man, that the Horseman, you know, like you said, vehicles aren't super at the forefront of Masters of the Universe, but you know, they love the series so much and they have such respect for it that they're like, well, we're gonna do these anyway, even though it's 6-inch, we'll still do it.
Yeah, and I mean, the price point that Mattel was able to release them at, that and the Battle Ram, which of course has the sky sled that separates, both those vehicles are iconic, and we got more than we could have ever asked for, and looking back, we're all super lucky for our collections.
Absolutely.
So that'll do it for another episode of the Jay and Rob Toy Show. Jay, I gotta ask you one last question, a Kobayashi Maru, and either or, what would you rather have in your collection? Ecto 1 for the Ghostbusters or the Party Wagon for the Ninja Turtles? You can only ever have one.
You know my answer is gonna be wrong whatever I say, but I'm gonna say Ecto 1. 100% Ecto 1.
So wrong. Why would you say that?
That vehicle's amazing, and especially if you get one that is still white, it's gorgeous. Yeah, I need that for sure. I have one for you. So, if you could pick the entire first wave of vehicles from Mask, or you could pick the entire first wave of vehicles from G.I. Joe, what would you pick, my friend?
I would take Mask because they're way harder to find complete, they're way more expensive, and they take up a lot less space. And I think they're a little bit more iconic looking.
Well, I don't know if I agree with the last part, but yes, I would probably do that too, because they are a lot more expensive.
Come on, Thunderhawk looks way better than a standard Sky Striker.
I thought you were just gonna make fun of my tank and showed.